Today on Hot Type, secret night flights, kidnap, terror suspects, and torture in foreign prisons. No, it's not a spy movie. It's all part of a secret CIA program uncovered by British journalist Stephen Gray in his new book, Ghost Plane.
I mean, they were sending these people to be interrogated. They were, you know, they knew they wouldn't be treated with kid gloves, and that's what they wanted.
1, 2.
Hot Type with Evan Solomon.
By now we all know the details of the Meher Arar case, how the CIA snatched him, put him on one of their secret planes, and flew him to Syria, where he spent 10 months in prison and where he was tortured. But Arar's case is hardly singular. There are literally hundreds of people who have been snatched by the CIA, put on secret flights, and sent to places where they've been interrogated and tortured. And the man that exposed this whole dark program to the world is a journalist named Stephen Gray. You know, rendition has been used for years in the United States as an actually illegal way to snatch criminals from foreign lands and bring them into American courts. So rendition wasn't exactly a secret thing.
Yes, but this was covert rendition, and it had a big difference. Because the old type of rendition, and you're right, it went back to the 1880s and was judged legal by American courts, was to bring people to justice, to a jury and a judge back in the US. But what we're talking about here is it was a secret program that began about 1995, and that was about sending people not to justice but to another country. It was about outsourcing the detention and also sometimes interrogation of the prisoners, and it was conducted in secret. They announced publicly these other renditions that brought people back to justice. People like Carlos the Jackal sent to Paris, or Ramzi Youssef, the man behind the first World Trade Center bombing, he was brought back to justice in the United States. And whatever you think about the method he was captured by, you know, snatch, kidnap, whatever, at the end of the day he was brought to a normal trial held in public, and the evidence against him could be heard. He had a chance to defend himself.
A free court, a free trial.
Right, and these people here, they had no chance to defend themselves. You know, right from the word go, this program began in secret in 1995, and one of the biggest renditions that took place under President Clinton was 5 people who were taken to Egypt, and of those, 2 were hanged without trial. So, and all of them were severely tortured. So they knew from the get-go, really, that they were sending people to be tortured.
By the time you get wind of it, post-2001, September 11th, this is kicking into high gear. Tell us what the CIA is actually doing.
Right, well, if you remember, after September the 11th, everyone said, this is a big surprise, we've got to think of new methods to tackle terrorism, we've got to think out the box, you know, be creative. But they weren't. I mean, they chose a program that was existing already and beefed it up massively, to the point where hundreds of people were then rendered. And the difference was now, they weren't just sent to places where there were kind of arrest warrants out for them, countries that wanted them. They were sent all over the place. They were sent in greater numbers, and they were also sent to new countries that perhaps would have been considered completely unacceptable before. I mean, we're talking now of countries including Uzbekistan, a country run by an ex-communist dictator, Karimov, that boils prisoners alive, and a country like Syria, which is, to all intents and purposes, an enemy of the United States. And yet this was a country we were now entrusting our prisoners, and had a country with very famous torture techniques, largely outlined by the United States. I mean, they've been the most compelling evidence about the way Syria treats its prisoners actually comes from the US government.
But this is still extraordinary. I mean, I know the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but how does the CIA talk to the Syrian government and say, please, we're going to flip a prisoner to you, and this is what you're saying, you torture him, get some information, flip that information back to us?
Well, I don't think they ever said, please torture him, but they wanted these people interrogated, and interrogated very intensively, to get as much intelligence as possible. And they knew that a country like Syria and Egypt would certainly interrogate them very thoroughly.
In the book you write that this went up to the very highest levels, Condoleezza Rice, George W. Bush, that they actually were aware of this CIA program of extraordinary rendition, of taking prisoners and sending them to these countries where most groups like Amnesty International were aware that torture would take place.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, you know George Bush has gone on record to say, we will not send someone back to a country who say they will torture them. Right? And that's the key word. They say they won't torture. What is wrong with that defense?
Well, there are things that people like President Bush say in public, and there's things that he knows to be true, or he doesn't bother to ask anyone about.
But is it a legal technicality that allows him to say what we're doing is not illegal?
It's a legal fig leaf. I mean, they know full well that's their defense all the way along. That's been the kind of legal justification. What the lawyers have said, well, you can get away just about with this program if you get this guarantee they won't be tortured. But, you know, that guarantee is based on the premise that it's credible. I mean, if it's not credible, then there is no legal protection, because it's all about your knowledge of what's going to happen to these people. I mean, they were sending these people to be interrogated. They were, you know, they knew they wouldn't be treated with kid gloves, and that's what they wanted.
Now, we all know the Meher Arar case, but let's just paint a picture of this program, the program you call Ghost Plane Program, but people know as Extraordinary Rendition. Just tell us the story of one shocking case to illustrate how this thing actually works.
Okay. Well, let's take the case of Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi. He was a camp commander in Afghanistan, one of the senior people under bin Laden. So definitely a very important suspected terrorist. He was captured on the Pakistan border, December 2001. At the time, perhaps one of the most important prisoners they'd captured so far. He was taken to Bagram Air Base, just north of Kabul, and he was questioned by the FBI in a normal fashion. Then a decision was taken at a very high level to hand him over, and he was literally snatched from the hands of the FBI, and this is according to the testimony of the FBI people involved, right, into the hands of the CIA, put in a box, literally wrapped up in a box, and flown to Egypt. And in Egypt he was interrogated, and guess what he came up with? Some very interesting intelligence. It actually said that the Saddam Hussein was training Al-Qaeda. It was information they wanted, and it was used by it was fed up the chain. It was used by Colin Powell before the United Nations to justify the war on Iraq. And Colin Powell referred to the fact that it came from a detainee under interrogation, but he never said that this was intelligence that had been obtained under Egyptian interrogation methods, i.e. torture.
How do you know he was tortured?
Because that's what happens in Egypt, and that was the statement. In fact, if you look at the memos from the people in the CIA who examined the case, who believed that this information was not credible because of the fact that it had been obtained under Egyptian interrogation. They wrote that down, they warned the White House about this, and yet it was still used in public.
In other words, they're torturing him, according to the allegation, so he'll just say anything to stop the pain.
Right.
But how do we know that the Egyptians actually tortured him? And what did they do to him?
Well, most of these cases of people like him, for example, they've not been released. They haven't been allowed to tell their story, so we can't verify his exact treatment now, and that's fair enough. And, you know, that's been the whole dilemma all along, which is why really this story has taken such a long time to come out, because we've always been faced with that dilemma. Here are these terrorists, suspected terrorists, telling these stories of torture. They're trained to lie, you know. That's why I tried to find ways to verify what was going on.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's the key question here.
One of the
people, they come out and they say, well, I was tortured by the Americans, and is it fair to say, you know, when the administration says you can't trust these people, they are suspected terrorists, there's no marks on them, this is a pack of lies as part of a propaganda war against the United States of America. How do you respond?
Well, I mean, the most important thing they've tried to keep secret was the very program itself, that they were transferring people to these places, because they know full well from their own evidence, published evidence, the way people treat people in these countries. So one of the first things I did was to try and verify the accounts of Rendition. But what I did was to take the accounts of people, and it was when I got into discovering this secret airline that moved people around and got hold of flight plans of their planes, tens of thousands of flight records. I was able to see that there are descriptions, exact times of and dates of when they were moved from one country to another, matched exactly the flight plans that I had. That was a key part of showing that they were, you know, that their stories were absolutely credible. And it was very interesting. You know, I'm still waiting. There's bound to be prisoners that do make things up, but out of all the accounts I've looked at, I've never found one that didn't match up, where the prisoners were not telling something straight here.
All right, when we come back, Stephen Gray will give us more details about the CIA's secret rendition program. You don't want to miss that, so stick around. Welcome back to Hot Type. Journalist Stephen Gray uncovered the CIA's program of extraordinary rendition. That's where suspected terrorists are literally being kidnapped on planes chartered by the CIA and taken to countries where torture is routine. People just like the Canadian Maher Arar. So how did he uncover this mystery? Well, the key to it all begins with the planes themselves.
Well, the planes start off in North Carolina. This is a front company that's operated for and actually owned secretly by the CIA. They present themselves as a kind of air charter company. And the key thing about that is that it's no surprise to see this sort of plane all over the world. It's the sort of thing that a diplomat or some businessman would use. So they can, it's a cover that allows them to land at almost anywhere. They pick up a team in Washington who've come over from the CIA. These are the people who, when they pick up prisoners, the prisoners are described wearing black ski masks, jeans, Timberland boots. That's the sort of the pattern. And then they get on the plane and then they fly off and go via various airports, maybe through Canada, through Europe primarily, Britain and Germany, stop there, and then they go off and do these missions, picking up someone, say, from Karachi airport, who's bundled aboard the plane and then flown off to his new destination.
Now, one of the extraordinary things is the kind of planes that Aero Contractors, the CIA front company, is leasing. They're not Hercules kind of cargo planes. These are plush Gulfstream kind of corporate jets. What's going on here?
Well, it's incredible, really. I mean, I remember speaking to a manager of an aviation company that refueled one of these planes, and he had a look inside, and he was in Mallorca, Spain, and he was saying this is the sort of plane we'd associate with the Rolling Stones or some Saudi prince or something. But the reason for using those sort of planes is because they also have a dual purpose. They can ferry around CIA's own VIPs, but also it's part of the cover. A very, very expensive method, but it does allow them to operate in countries where a kind of military plane, a US military plane, would look a bit out of kilter. It's part of the covert nature of the program to sort of have this appearance of a businessman's charter service.
Now, you would think that uncovering these flights would be as complex as the rendition program itself. But Gray says he tracked it all down by simply following the numbers on the tails of the airplanes. Then he traced the flights on the internet, and using this method, he was able to corroborate the stories of many of the suspects he'd interviewed and the CIA agents who, on the promise of anonymity, had talked to him about their involvement in the rendition program.
Well, I was amazed. I mean, I was amazed, first of all, that I could get this information. When I started off, an editor of the paper I was working at, the Sunday Times, said, "How the hell are you going to find this out?" And I really just thought, I haven't a clue, and it was stunning to me that it was so easy to get hold of these huge amounts of data about these operations. And my reaction was, wow, what does this show? This is a whole pattern of activity.
Now here, we've been really sensitive to this in Canada because of Maher Arar, who's just had a settlement upwards to $12.5 million, 11.5, there's some debate as to the extent of the money. 10 months in the Syrian prison. Was his case typical, and is his case typical of what you call the ghost plane phenomena?
His case is a little bit different because it involves a snatch or an arrest in the United States on US soil, and therefore it came under a lot of legal controls, a lot more bureaucratic paperwork that was involved in allowing his rendition to Syria. But similar in the sense of where he was sent. When he arrived, and I think in October 2002, when he was there, I counted about 7 other prisoners who were there in that jail as a result of the United States. So he was part of a pattern. And one of the reasons I believe about the kind of torture that goes on and the way people have been treated is people like Maher Arar, and I'm sure you've met him, and you look into his eyes and you believe what he says. He paints a very compelling picture of what's happened. And people say that these people make the stories up. I've been really struck by how many torture victims I've spoken to who don't exaggerate. So I find all of these stories very compelling.
One of the questions you raise is, does this stuff work? Are they getting information that is, as George Bush has said many times, saving American lives?
I don't believe so. I've never seen a single example of that. It's possible. I'd be naive to say people don't say true things under torture. Of course they do occasionally. But I think the problem is when they do say things, you don't know whether it's true or false. And I've asked that question of every person in the CIA I've met who's never come up with an example, and it made them unconvinced themselves. But it does work for one or two things. It works to disappear people. People are never seen again. There's no embarrassing trial where all what's happened to them is revealed in most cases. It works in that it produces confessions. People confess, and you can retroactively justify what you've been doing. I think many people in the agency hope they would get useful information out of these transfers, but it's not shown to be the case.
And you talk about 90 cases in this book.
Yeah.
What percentage of those 90 people have been proven to be guilty of the things that they were alleged to have been part of, and what part of them have been like Meher Arar, wrongfully tortured and therefore exonerated and maybe one day compensated?
Well, none of them have been. None of them have been proven to be involved in acts of terrorism, and the whole point is they're not brought to trial.
None of them.
None of them. I'm not saying they aren't terrorists. I'm not saying the majority of them aren't terrorists. I don't know. I just happen to believe that the way to test the evidence against people is to bring them to trial and let's hear the evidence.
All right, when we come back, we'll find out why countries like Italy and Germany are filing charges against agents from the CIA who were part of the ghost plane program. So stick around. Welcome back to Hot Type. Now, the publication of Stephen Gray's book, Ghost Plane, and Gray's various articles on the CIA's extraordinary rendition program blew the cover on the whole covert operation. And it's also recently led to charges against CIA operatives in both Italy and Germany.
I published in this book, actually, for the first time, details of the team of people, the flight crew and the rendition team that flew from Mallorca, an island off Spain, to Eastern Europe to pick up this German citizen, Khalid al-Masri, take him to a CIA jail in Afghanistan where he was there for five months. Now, the German police have been investigating that matter, and when they saw details of this team, they've started to investigate themselves and found the names of these people, and they've issued arrest warrants for 13 members. These are the same team that I wrote about.
Now, let's talk about this al-Masri case. This is a phenomenal case. This week, German authorities, actually, as you say, German authorities issued arrest warrants for 13 CIA agents who were part of snatching a man named al-Masri off German soil. What does it mean that suddenly the German government is turning on the CIA? What is the significance of that event?
It's I think of really great significance, because Germany is a great ally of the United States. The German federal authorities and the federal prosecutors are very, very serious people, and they're treating a very important a prisoner transfer, which the German government has now been informed about, and yet still believes is a criminal activity, a crime of kidnap, which is a very serious offence. And it's politically makes it very difficult for the United States.
What does this mean for the rendition program now run by the United States? What's the future of this program?
Well, it's got severe problems, the rendition program at the moment. If nothing else, there aren't many people in the CIA who want to be involved in this. When you've got now 40 alleged CIA operatives now facing charges, it's not a popular thing to be involved in. But they won't go away at rendition, because they have all these people in their custody now, and they've got to do something with them. The United States doesn't want to release these prisoners. It's been treating many of these people in quite an abusive way over the last getting on for 5 years. So the evidence they've got against them is very weak, because it's not the sort of evidence you can bring in court. But there are still many hundreds of people in American custody, or people they've rendered to different places. So unless they release these people, they're going to have to find somewhere to send them. So they're kind of stuck with the rendition program for some time to come.
Now, one of the things, we talk about extraordinary rendition and what these people went through, but in the name of national security, the US government and other governments have said, look, secrecy is important. Even judges in these cases have said, we're not interested in exposing the methods of our CIA and our intelligence service, because lives depend on this and security depends on this. Where do you draw the line between exposure and the need for security?
I've tried to be very careful in what I've been writing to try and take a fine line on all this. I kept these flight logs secret for a very long time, until I thought the information was no longer very active. I haven't published the names of all the people I know involved in the program. But you have to find out these methods to prove, you have to find out some of these secrets in order to prove the involvement of the US government in these activities. Now in Europe, we have all kinds of inquiries going on, and they're being led by the toughest judges in Europe, toughest prosecutors. These are the very prosecutors that have been prosecuting Al-Qaeda all over Europe, and they're the same judges right now who are investigating the CIA. They believe in the rule of law, and they believe that terrorists should be prosecuted, but they should be prosecuted in a legal way. And I think with all the political inquiries going on at the moment, and a new Congress in the United States determined apparently to investigate these things, you've got almost a kind of perfect storm developing against the rendition program, where it looks like the real facts of this whole program are going to emerge.
And finally, do you think other governments in Europe who have been implicated in the reports, the EU report, they were complicit in these torture planes, do you think we'll see more cases like the ones we've seen in Germany now and in Italy?
Yeah, I think there are more cases to come. I think that we'll certainly see more facts and more renditions exposed. I think the other point is that even though these governments deny publicly any involvement in the rendition program, and I think wrongly state that they're not complicit, one thing's for certain: they're very, very nervous about this issue, and any future rendition flight that passes through Europe is going to face quite strong scrutiny in those countries. They're certainly saying, don't do this anymore.
Stephen, it's a great pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stephen Gray's book, Ghost Plane, is part of a long tradition where a single journalist managed to expose a great untruth. Of course, the great-grandfather of that is Alexander Solzhenitsyn in his book, The Gulag Archipelago. But this book really manages to show why cases like Meher Arar are not singular. In fact, there are hundreds of others like them. And at the heart of the cases now against the CIA agents in places like Italy and Germany, you will find the research of Stephen Gray. This guy's made a big difference, and for that alone you should read this book. But he also goes into great detail about international law, which is so vital to this case. And he also writes about this as if it's a thriller, and it really is the kind of thriller you wish wasn't real. Is all the writing in this book great? It's not. This guy is not Solzhenitsyn, but he is a great journalist. He has written an important book, and I would urge you to pick it up. Ghost Plane by Stephen Gray is published by St. Martin's Press. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to comment on this book or anything you see on Hot Type, go to the website cbc.ca/hot type. But for now, from a hangar that's not full of ghost planes, but great planes anyway, I'm Evan Solomon. I'll see you again on Hot Type.